More realignment talk as BC might have some new bed partners in Cal and Stanford, but we're going to look at what actually is happening there and is ACC actually doing anything. We'll also talk about camp and season expectations. We're going to be joined by Mitch Wolf. This is an episode you're not going to want to miss.
You are Locked On Boston College, your daily podcast on the Boston College Eagles, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome. This is Locked On BC. I'm your host, AJ Black. I'm the editor and publisher of Eagle Insider. Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. Again, I a couple of weeks ago, I said, with the start of August, it should be the start of talk of camp, and you put all the realignment stuff to the side. But we're not getting that kind of reprieve here, as more and more realignment news and rumors and reports are coming out. And I wanted to kind of go over that and some Boston College news today with Mitch Wolf. Mitch, how's it going?
I was hoping that, like you said, we could have this episode and just talk about BC and not have to, rehash all this realignment stuff. But of course, there's new news dropping, and I think one of our a coach that holds a special place in many BC fans' hearts, Eli Drinkwitz at Missouri, made a joke about, I thought the transfer portal had already closed because all these schools are switching conferences in the middle of the summer, like less than a month before the season starts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so let's get into the hot rumor right now, or the news article that came up, which was Nicole Auerbach, I think, was the first to break it, and it was she was reporting that the ACC was doing their due diligence and exploring the potential addition of Cal and Stanford. Now, this report has already been, I don't want to say refuted, but kind of squashed a little bit by Brandon Marcello of 247, saying that it seems like it's going to be a long shot. Mitch, give me your perspective on this whole Stanford Cal thing.
Well, on the one hand, that's exactly what happened with the Washington and Oregon situation. Is there was this momentum towards it, then they went into the night saying, "Oh, we don't think it's going to happen," and by next morning, it was essentially a done deal. Obviously, it's a little bit of a different scenario because that was still kind of in the middle of the Pac-12 presenting their TV deal, and now kind of all that's out in the open, and we know that it was all an Apple TV subscription-based model, and it's kind of a risky move, and now these schools are trying to get out of it, and luckily Stanford and Cal, have the institutional structures and the financial backing to make such a move, whereas the two remaining Pac-12 schools, Washington State and Oregon State, don't really have that foundation to do so. So, I mean, sure, it's fine. I mean, it's ridiculous that for non-football sports, it's obviously ridiculous. I mean, for basketball, it's maybe a little better, but for non-revenue sports, it's obviously ridiculous. And I don't think these schools really add much to the ACC's profile, but they're really running out of options, and if they really want to save this conference. And you mentioned the ACC doing their due diligence. Man, nobody does their due diligence, and which means doing nothing, like the ACC, because Jim Phillips has just been sitting on his hands throughout this entire process. He's basically letting every other big conference, go out and make moves, add school. I'm not saying adding Washington and Oregon would have made sense for the ACC, but he's letting all these other conferences dictate the landscape to him, and he's doing nothing. And now the ACC is running out of schools they can add. So yeah, I mean, Stanford and Cal are some of the best options left, but once you get past them, I mean, I honestly think at this point, adding UConn would be a smart idea if they can somehow swing adding them for basketball as well, although that seems unlikely. But after that, you're looking at schools like USF, James Madison, ECU, Memphis, and it's just like, what are we doing here? And
right.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
It's frustrating too, because you're hearing the reports of the postmortem of the Oregons and Washingtons leaving, and they were in talks with the ACC, and again, it was Jim Phillips that couldn't seal the deal.
And that's the whole thing is that, it's like, oh, this move doesn't really make sense for us. It's not going to be the best thing. It's like, well, that's better than nothing, which is what the ACC has done so far. And, with the ACC, with Florida State, getting some money from JP Morgan. And I mean, Miami is, probably going to turn to the Saudis to give John Ruiz a buyout at this point. Those schools and maybe Clemson too are, trying to get their way out. And once they're gone, I mean, the ACC might as well just pack up shop and, the BC, Syracuse, Pitt can knock on the door of the Big Ten to say, please take us in. We have nowhere else to go. It's cold outside.
Yeah. It's scary. It feels like Phillips hasn't done anything.
I do want to say this though. And I think my opinion on this is a little different than some people's, and it could be wrong because again, I'm not an expert on TV contracts, grants of rights. Obviously I'm not an expert on any of that, but I am of the opinion that obviously BC is not a major brand in and of itself, but I think that them being uniquely situated as the one school that has at least a stable foothold on the Boston TV/media market makes them a valuable asset that, essentially gives them safe harbor kind of wherever they're going to go, and I think that remains in a Power 5 conference or, a power conference schema. If a super league develops where the top 20 to 25 schools leave the NCAA and form their own thing, then yeah, BC's out in the cold for sure. But as long as there's kind of maybe essentially the Big Ten and the SEC, as long as those are the two superpowers, BC has this hold on the Boston media market, which we've seen these conferences, add very strange schools that are either worst football or worse athletic departments or in worse media markets. Look at how when the Big Ten added Rutgers, sure,
Yep.
You got New York, but you were about 8 years too late, or more like 5 years too late in terms of adding Rutgers, and they have done nothing. This big article in The Athletic just came out about how adding Rutgers has been a nightmare for both the conference because Rutgers hasn't added a thing, and it's been a nightmare for Rutgers themselves because they're over $250 million in debt since joining the Big Ten. So nobody's gotten anything out of that. And Maryland, it's been fine. They're especially their non-revenue sports have been pretty solid, but their football team just can't really get past Penn State or Ohio State on that side of the division. So, and then even look at like how when the SEC did their big expansion with Missouri and Texas A&M. You take Texas A&M because they're the jilted ex-lover of Texas, and then you add Missouri, and it's like, well, what does Missouri really add? You're getting the Kansas City/St. Louis media markets. Look at even how the Big 12 expanded this round. You're looking at teams where they expand into these relatively unorthodox media markets. They go out and get Houston, that's a good media market. They go out and get Central Florida. That's, the Big 12 doesn't have a footprint in Florida. That's good for them. BYU, Salt Lake City is a pretty big media market. So, and now, they've added all of Arizona. They've added Colorado back in. Even when the Pac-12 first expanded, bringing in Colorado and Utah, those were two big media markets that were solid moves at the time. But so that's kind of why I think BC is in a stronger foothold than it's not as doom and gloom as I think a lot of people want to believe, unless that Super League forms. But that also entails probably the death of the NCAA, which is kind of a thing we can all celebrate.
Yeah. And before we kind of wrap this up, I also think, and we haven't really talked about this, that I think these big leagues, I think it's going to swing the other way eventually. Cause I get the sense, and I've read a lot, that these media groups are going to want to start to cut money. So I don't want to say relegation, but you're going to see, I think teams are going to start getting cut out of these things.
I think that I agree. And I think I want, and this is where I think BC is safer than a team like Indiana, where, especially for football, where they don't really bring anything. They're not in a major media market. A team like Vanderbilt, where granted they have a lot of money to bring, but you have Tennessee right down the road, which brings a lot more, and you're still in the Nashville media market. I think where you have those redundancies, then you could see teams like that get dropped. But UConn, for their football team is still rebuilding. Their basketball team is obviously their bigger brand, but I mean, it's not like UMass or Holy Cross is going to be like, yes, we will carry the Boston media market flag. No conference is in their right mind would add those teams to get a foothold in that media market.
All right, in a second, we're done with realignment. Let's move on.
For now.
I say that, and then tomorrow morning I'm going to see Brett McMurphy or Brandon Marcello with some news, breaking on it, and I'll have to talk about it again. But I want to talk about BC. That's why I brought Mitch on today. So in a moment, we're going to get into camp, what some of the things that Mitch is hearing, what we've heard, and give some of his reactions. You're going to want to hear that. We'll get into that in just a second. Now, if you have not checked out Locked On ACC, now Candace Cooper and Kenton Gibbs, they have it locked down. You want to get all the realignment news. If you're getting into this or you just want to prepare for the season, they are the place to go. Find Locked On ACC wherever you get your podcasts. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs help you find the right people for your team faster and for free. So you're looking for somebody. You've checked, you've interviewed, you're not finding the right people. Get on LinkedIn. Add your job in the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring. With simple tools like screening questions, it makes it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs help you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. This is Locked On BC. I'm your host, AJ Black. Thank you to everyone who has made Locked On BC your everyday experience. If you're listening, if you're an everydayer, thank you so much. We're less than a month away from the start of the season, and I want you all here to get ready for BC and NIU. So make sure to hit that subscribe button and give us 5 stars. It does help people find us. All right, Mitch. Camp started. We've been there for over a week now. What are some of the things that you're watching and some of the things that you've been interested in?
So obviously I'm not there because, again, practices are pretty closed down. And also I live halfway across the country, so I'm not there looking at practices and not getting any unique information. I'm kind of reading what you reported, reading what other people have reported. And I would say in general, the tricky thing about camp is that a lot of it, and this comes from every team, it's not unique to BC, is every team's going to say, yeah, we're really excited about this. No team is going to come out and say, man, we're really worried about this year. I mean, some teams are, I know Virginia Tech, they've said, this is going to be a long rebuilding process, but that's more of a kind of a global take as opposed to just this season. But the fact that there is a lot more positive coming out of this camp relative to last year when there were a lot more concerns, and again, a lot of it revolved around the offensive line, that is at least getting me to a base level of being content, where this is going to be kind of confusing, but I would say with football camp is no news is bad news, but good news is no news. And those two statements are not linked because then it wouldn't make any sense. But essentially, if there's no news, it's like, okay, well, then they're not letting anything out. That's a problem. But if there's good things are coming out, then it's like, okay, things are humming along at least decently, but don't read too much into it. And, the NFL training camps are obviously going on as well. We're fresh off of media days. And I know the Cover 3 podcast guys talked about this a lot in that, you go to ACC media and everybody's excited about their team. So it's hard to, not be bullish and be swept up in the positive attitude of everything. But one thing that I'm intrigued about is I watched Emmett Moorhead's media availability session and compared, and you mentioned this and you kind of just had to watch it and kind of just compare him to when Dracovic was the quarterback. And it seems that Moorhead is just better at thinking on his feet. And again, it's like, how much does this matter with the press availability? But he just seems a lot more comfortable, more calm, like you said, confident. Whereas it seemed like Dracovic was kind of just like, hey, like before he went, it's like, hey, here's the script, say these things, don't deviate. Whereas Moorhead seems a lot more comfortable in his own skin, seems comfortable with everything that's going on. And based on all the reports we've gotten at practice in terms of what's going on the field, I mean, I think that there's a lot of reasons to be optimistic about this team. I get why a lot of outside media, whether it be the ACC itself or just in general, people are down on this team. Even people who are looking beyond just the statistics from last year where everything was terrible, and people who know it's like, okay, that year you kind of throw it out, but still there are questions about this team. I get why people are somewhat negative about this team, but I still think because there really aren't a lot of question marks on this team, and we'll talk about one maybe a little later, that and again, the easy nature of the schedule is huge. Getting a lot of teams who are kind of at the beginning of a rebuilding stage is huge for BC in this schedule. You get the 2 Virginia schools, you get Georgia Tech, even some of the non-cons they have, getting Army, who's doing this complete revamp with that, moving away from the option. UConn is still, they're only in year 2 of the Jim Moore era, and they've got some good players, but they're still, figuring things out. That's huge. So, I think BC is going to possibly surprise a lot of people. And honestly, now I'm kind of trying to go the other way. I don't want to get swept up and say, the classic, 15-0, here we come. But even every year when the schedule comes out, like, oh, that's 9-3. And I try to work myself back, say, okay, let's be a little more realistic. Try to do a bigger margin for error where things can go wrong. And again, I don't think things will go as wrong as they did last year, but I think that this team is going to positively surprise a lot of people, finish a lot higher than they did in the AC than what the ACC media expects. And again, I think part of that is because of the schedule, and maybe this team, in terms of when you, at the end of the year, you look at the statistics, it's like, okay, well, the easy schedule helped them. It's like, well, honestly, at this point, BC just kind of needs these wins, getting back to a winning record, getting back to a bowl game, regardless of where you finish in these statistical measures, just get back on the field and start winning some games. I think that's super important for this program. And to kind of tie it back to the realignment thing is this program needs to show that it is alive and is a valuable brand that is going to be worth something as we continue along this realignment chaotic hellscape.
Yeah. I mean, it is hard, as someone who goes to press conferences. I didn't make it today, but I've been to the first 2, and I'll be there again on Wednesday. Everything is positive, right? And as a media member, you have to use your judgment to like parse out what is coach speak, what is, just what he's going to say to make things sound okay. And what are the things that are interesting, that are different. And I just want to throw out there, one of the things Hafley said today that I thought was really interesting is where they are in their install of their offense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was that. I thought that was very insightful as well.
So BC at this point last year, I think he said they were still doing their third down stuff, and like really robotic and scripted plays. And Hafley said, A, that they're further along, and B, that he's getting away from doing the scripted plays and making the coaches and players think on their feet, more live football, so that they're pushing and making them uncomfortable. And I thought that was a really insightful and interesting way. And I kind of like that. That's kind of the direction that they're going with that.
Yeah, I think that is interesting. And, recently, as a Steelers fan, this is something that I think can connect to this. Is they recently did one of those videos where they post the question on the whiteboard and all the players walk by it and they answer the question. The question was, what is your favorite Tomlinism? And Mike Tomlin is famous for these kind of weird aphorisms about football and whatever, but a lot of them said, do not seek comfort. And that is definitely one of Tomlin's favorites to use is, find beauty in the anguish of the sport, find ways to make yourself uncomfortable so that when the uncomfortable situations present themselves in a real game situation, you can at least be more ready for them compared to if you had sought comfort previously. And I think that that's something that now that, because this team is so much more experienced, as Hafley has talked about, they can move on from saying, okay, we have to work on just the basics of this install. It's like, okay, you guys are getting what our script is about, what these game plans are about. Now let's start throwing you curveballs. How do these certain things change how you react in a game? If things aren't working this way, what is our next step? How do we respond to that? And that's, like you said, that just shows how far ahead this team is. And Hafley mentioned, said, guys we had starting lots of games last year are now on the third on the depth chart, or like deep backups, so guys like, again, no shade to them, specifically with Jackson Nestway now, like those guys, Nick Thomas, who are, were thrust in the starting lineup for multiple games without any starts on their belt. Now, again, in the worst case scenario where they have to play again, they're not being thrown to the fire. And again, they won't be surrounded by those same players where it's, one side of the line is Drew Kendall, a freshman starting center, and then, Jackson Ness, converted defensive end, and Nick Thomas, a walk-on offensive tackle. Now, if one of them has to go in, it's okay, well, you've got players around you that have a better sense of know what they're doing. And there are leaders on that line, like a Christian Mahagan, like a Kyle Hergel, who can take command of that group. And, even if it's not up to the best standards, saying we can at least make this work to some extent.
And I thought that another piece that, as a media member, that I thought was really interesting too, was that he said that he last year had to cut practices early because he just ran out of players to use, which makes a lot of sense. I had to tell you just a quick story. Last year, I don't live anywhere near BC. I live about an hour away, and I would commute because I'm not going to go watch them stretch. It's not worth me sitting at BC for 2 hours because their parking garages are insane. But I would go and like time it. So I'd get there at like 10:15. And there would be times I'd get there and they'd already had finished the media session. I'm like, what the heck? But they had cut practice early. And I'm like, why are they doing this? But now it kind of makes things mesh. I'm like, oh, they ran out of players last year. And that's why the media sessions were so early, or like not what they were supposed to be. So it was interesting that he didn't even have enough players for that. So we're going to be back in just a moment to talk about expectations from this year for this season. And Mitch wants to talk about some question marks and what some of the national media folks are saying about BC and what his reactions are to that. You're not going to want to miss that. We'll be back in a moment. This is Locked On BC. If you're listening live right now, you have about 3 hours to get over to Eagle Insider. We have 60% off an annual subscription. We have hit record numbers of subs on our channel, and I want you to be there. It is $3 and I think 38 cents a month for a full year. You're going to get recruiting scoops. You're going to get all Mitch's insights. You're going to get, camp info. Everything is all on there. And it's for the price of a cup of coffee a month. Go over to Eagle Insider. I'm going to put the link in the comment section while Mitch is talking. Click in, sign up right now. Be part of our site. You're not going to regret it. I promise you that. All right, Mitch, you're up. What did you want to talk about next?
So, part of one of my summer series was doing positional breakdowns of every position group for BC, and guys, I was going through them. Okay, this position group is pretty solid. There's a starter, or there's several starters who, you feel like, okay, this is fine. There's a backup that you feel, okay, if there's an injury, we can plug this guy in, and things can at least continue on relatively swimmingly. And that's the case for almost every position. The one where I don't think that is the case is the secondary. And looking at it, you've got Elijah Jones, veteran player. He's not the best ever. He's still good, and he's a quality starter. And he's a player you can rely on, and you can ask him to do a number of things. You've got a guy like Amari Jackson, who is unproven, but I think has a lot of really good skills and is going to be a breakout player this year. You've got Cole Batson, who's coming back essentially for his second year as a starter. He started for most of last year and got a good amount of playing time. The other two players you're expecting to start are FCS transfers who had a good amount of success at that level of football, but moving from that to Power 5 football it's a question mark. It's a variable that you don't know how it's going to turn out just yet. And behind those guys, I do think there could be a scenario where, and honestly, the secondary had this issue a bit last year, where injuries do a number on them, similar to the offensive line, where if guys do start going down, you are going to experience a depth issue, because you're going to have to start putting in guys like Isaiah Ferris, Max Tucker, Carter Davis, who's a true freshman who enrolled in the spring, and he was listed as safety, but he played a lot more corner, so that he's an interesting name. Jalen Williams, those kind of guys. And some of them, they played a little bit last year, and it didn't go super well, but it's a very small sample size, so it's a little unfair. Or even a guy like Jalen Cheek, who did play well early on, but suffered an injury. You've got a lot of question marks there. With that being said, of all the position groups where I feel like that is the biggest question mark, I'm most comfortable with it being the secondary, because that is the position group where you have Jeff Hafley, Azar Abdul-Rahim. Paul Rhodes is technically the linebackers coach, but he's been a head coach. He's been a defensive coordinator. He's one of Hafley's mentors. They know what they're talking about. So that's a group that, even if they might not have the talent there, that's a group that can be coached up by this coaching staff, and they have a unique advantage relative to like kind of your average coaching staff. Because like we've talked about, this team is, I think, very solid in the trenches, both in terms of talent and depth. They have plenty of skill position players, linebackers, everybody's back. I know that fans don't love the production there, and I think there's been a lot of mistakes, but I'd rather have guys that I kind of know what they are and I think are going to be improving with a generally improved defense around them. So again, I think this all leads it back to this team is going to be uniquely situated to beat a lot of expectations, whether it be betting lines, guys getting all ACC honors. I think you're going to see BC have a lot more guys on there than expected. I think they only had 2 that made the preseason all ACC teams in Ezeraku and Mahogany, and I think that you're going to see a lot more guys appear. And even if they're just honorable mentions, you're going to see a lot of those guys appear on the postseason list because, as Hafley has talked about, I think this team is just desperate to get last year behind them. And, once you kick that ball off against NIU in a few weeks, that season is truly in the past. You don't know anything about it anymore. And I think they're excited at this point to, as most teams are at this point in camp, ready to hit somebody else. And they're ready to go out. And like Hafley said, and I really appreciate this mentality where he's like, sure, they voted us second to last. We don't really care. Like, we're not sure, it's motivating, but that's not our primary thing. Cause I think so many, and I think specifically of a guy like Kirby Smart and his mentor, Nick Saban, who, find these, and when you're at that level of football, I guess you need to find slights wherever you can. But I don't really like how coaches will, manufacture these imagined slights against their team. Yeah, exactly. Lil Clamson.
Yep.
To motivate the teams like I feel like that's a cheap tactic. And if you're a better coach, you can find better ways to motivate your players. And I mean, I know people get on Hafley for this message, but he's very consistent about, love each other, play for each other, play to be better, play to make every play better than the last. And I think for a team like BC, I think that's just a better overall strategy of how to approach playing football at the collegiate level.
Right, because it feels like when you do the bulletin board material, quote unquote, with a media article that you don't agree with.
And if you want to, and there are specific times where that could, like for example, I mentioned Eli Drinkwitz earlier. I'm sure that got brought up in that Missouri game a few years ago.
Yep.
But basing your entire program about having this antagonistic view towards everything, where everything is I just feel like that's just not realistic. It's not mentally healthy.
It's not sustaining either.
No, it's not exactly. It's not sustaining. It doesn't. And I think this is a big thing about BC is it doesn't prepare you for a normal life after football. And I think that's, again, one of the big things that we always talk about is something that sets BC apart from other college football programs and even programs that are relatively similar to BC in terms of their academic requirements and kind of just, for lack of a better term, general vibe.
Right. All right, Mitch. I know we had more to talk about, but I'm going to have you hold on to that for next week because we're out of time.
That's fine. We kind of covered it all, and I'm sure we'll have more realignment news to discuss next week.
Oh God, yeah. So
and
Mitch
Marty Party joined Justin.
I don't know when's the last time you've been on. It's been like a couple.
It's been a while. I was on vacation last week, so it would have been tough. But other than that, I've just been working towards getting these opponent previews done, which. I'm a little behind, so hopefully I can get the last of those done before NIU week so I can really focus on that team. And luckily for those teams, the teams that BC's played, there haven't been a ton of major changes since I've written those articles. So that's at least good. Of course, by the time those games come up, there will certainly be changes, and we'll just have more information about BC's opponents. So we'll be able to refresh those articles with more information.
All right. Mitch, where can people find you other than on Eagle Insider?
You can find me at Mitchell T. Wolfe, WOLFE, on Twitter. Yes, it's Twitter. I'll die before I call it the other name. Find me on there. That's where I'll be retweeting the articles and just talking about BC football in general up until we finally get games going, which is just a few weeks away. And I'm just so excited for there to be actual games played as opposed to talking about TV contracts and grants of rights.
Exactly. And you can find me on Twitter as well, but find me on Eagle Insider. Find both of us on Eagle Insider. It's a little easier, and you're not you're supporting us, not Elon. So so find us over there as well. And we'll be back again tomorrow with more camp news, anything else that's popping. Talk a little bit about basketball and all the goodies that you want about Boston College sports. Thank you all so much, and we'll see you again soon. Take care, everyone.